Hello again. You know what time it is. It's time for another Tiny Desk sermon. Glad you could join me today, whether you're with me live or watching later. Love to have you leave a comment and let me know you're out there, or if you have any thoughts or questions on the text in the Tiny Desk sermon that I'm going to share. And if you don't already subscribe to our channel, you can do that by hitting the subscribe button, and that way you always know when we're going live, whether it's for worship or this or anything else. This Sunday is Lectionary 19C, and we're going to look quickly at the Old Testament reading from Genesis, and then focus on the Gospel reading from Luke. The Old Testament reading is one of my favorite stories from Genesis. So in Genesis 12, God calls Abram and Sarai to follow and trust the blessing that God is going to provide to them and then through them to the world. And part of that blessing is, hey, Trish, good to see you out there. Part of the blessing is that they would have descendants, and that hasn't happened yet. So we get multiple stories in Genesis of Abraham or Abram earlier talking to God and saying, it still hasn't happened. I'm not sure I believe it will. And this is another one. So after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. So, Abram is afraid. And Abram is afraid because God is not following through on the promise that God had declared. You haven't given me any offspring, so it doesn't look like it's going to happen. But the word of the Lord came to him. Don't worry about the other child you had with your servant. And then I love this. He brought him outside. God brought Abram outside. Look toward heaven and count the stars if you are able to count them. So shall your descendants be. Love that imagery of going out and counting the stars. Right now it's making me think about the images from the new telescope, and I'm forgetting now what the new telescope is called, but it's wonderful, and all these amazing images of the stars, and that's meant to be a sign for Abram that God will follow through. And so Abram's response is he believed the Lord, or maybe better translated, he trusted God, and God reckoned it to him as righteousness. That is a key verse in a lot of Lutheran theology about how trusting or believing God is reckoned as righteousness. So Abram trusts the promise, and then carries on. And the interesting thing is he carries on as if it is true already. Hang on to that thought. I guess it's the Webb telescope. I don't know why I'm blanking out on that, but that amazing new thing. And I can't wait to see more images coming from that. Okay, so the reading from Luke, this comes right after the one we heard last week about the brother who wanted his brother to divide the inheritance with him, and Jesus says, be on guard against greed. Life doesn't consist of possessions. And now we get kind of further commentary on all this. Jesus said, do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Be dressed for action, and have your lamps lit. Be like those who are waiting for their master to return from the wedding banquet, so that they may open the door for him as soon as he comes and knocks. Blessed are those slaves whom the master finds alert when he comes. Truly, I tell you, he will fasten his belt and have them sit down to eat, and he will come and serve them. If he comes during the middle of the night or near dawn and finds them so, blessed are those slaves. But know this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. All right. It's a little confusing there at the end. We'll see what we can do with that maybe. So, do not be afraid. Little flock. Sort of an endearing term expressing a kind of relationship of care and dependence as a shepherd to sheep, of course. Do not be afraid takes us to that story about Abram. And then the question then is, well, what are we afraid of? And how does God's desire, God's pleasure in giving us life in God, I'm going to use that to talk about the kingdom, how does that address our fears? Part of the hearing of this text is to be willing to ponder what we might be afraid of. And it seems to me that a lot of our fear is about what we might lose, whether it's property, relationships, maybe status, employment, and life itself. And so I think we are afraid of this unknown thing that might cause us to lose what we have or are, or our relationships. And we have a lot of fear about that. And then that fear drives our choices, our actions, our attitudes. And so when Jesus says, don't be afraid, because God is giving you that one thing that no one can take away, the thing you can't lose, which is life in God. And that life in God is not simply some kind of heavenly future. When Jesus says it's God's good pleasure to give you the kingdom, he means the reigning governance of God in our lives on earth. And this is what God gives us. It's not what we earn or have to kind of find. We simply receive it and try to learn how to trust it. And then he goes on to say, so be dressed for action and have your lamps lit. I think that means live as if the coming kingdom is arriving already. And therefore, when it does arrive in fullness, when God arrives in fullness in our lives, we're kind of already there. We're ready for it. We're ready to welcome it because we're already living it. All right, so I found a quote from Well, purportedly from Nelson Mandela. I have not verified it yet, but I do like the quote. May your choices reflect your hopes, not your fears. And I think that's what Jesus is getting at here, that we live out of our hope in God rather than our fear of losing what we have and even losing our lives. And then it affects our choices in life. In Jesus' example here, there's a freedom to give some of our possessions away to those who have few possessions. That comes out of the freedom of knowing that God is inviting us and already decided to include us in a richness of life that only God can provide. When it says, "For it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom," I believe the verb tense there is that it's something God has already decided. It's not something that might happen. It's a given. And so when we live out of that hope, what choices, how are our choices changed? The choices of how to live our day-to-day lives. I think it at least frees us up a little bit to find joy in using what we have to bring life to others. And so maybe for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. If we treasure what God offers us and gives us freely, that kind of centers our lives differently. So, I invite everyone to ponder what that fear is for you, or those fears are. Fear of what you might lose. This notion that God is God's pleasure to give us the kingdom emphasizes that life in God is a gift, and therefore, and God's already determined to give it, and to give it now as well as fulfill it in the future. And so all we can do is receive it and respond to it. And this is a central kind of Lutheran way of thinking about God's grace. We're using different language here. It's God giving the kingdom, but we could say it's grace. All we can do is receive it as a gift and then respond to it. And the response to it is out of that freedom we have of not fearing what we think we might lose. In fact, you can't lose it if you're giving it away, right? And the real kind of danger of living in our fear of what we're going to lose is that it drives us away from the life that God is offering, and it drives us toward other ways, other offers of governance, other kingdoms, because somehow they think they will protect us from losing what we fear losing. So, may your choices reflect your hopes, not your fears. So really, what we have to keep striving for is to name what we hope for from God, and then to live in that hope, not naively, not Pollyanishly, but because of the deep trust we place in God. And we know that getting to wherever it is we hope to get as individuals and as humanity and as creation, that it's not a quick and easy road. But to live out of that hope transforms us, and it, we then can strive to align our lives with what we hope for. I'm seeing a comment that's very hopeful and affirming reading. The thief bridegroom section is so often used to create fear of hell. I really appreciate that. Oh, right. So I didn't touch too much yet on the ending. It's a sort of a little apocalyptic ending. and it is that, you know, there is a day to come when God will, arrive in fullness in our lives, in the reality of the world, and that is not something to fear. It is something to hope for, and so the way we live in hope for that is to let our choices reflect our hope. We live with our we're dressed for action. We have our lamps lit. We just live out the kingdom now, imperfectly, but hopefully. And then it we're both ready to receive it even more, and it becomes, I think, more real to us. We are able to, so to speak, see God more clearly when we are living God's vision for human life, which is love and generosity and justice and mercy. So the mini apocalyptic parable there is not meant to get us to live to fearfully, try to do the right thing so that maybe we'll get in when the end comes, but to hopefully live out of knowing it's God's desire to include us, and has already decided to do that. I don't know why I've always been intrigued by this, but you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. So, why I think that works and isn't necessarily meant to be a fear-creating thing is, well, it's sort of like, let's say you have a bunch of employees in a company, and the boss is away, and the boss is going to be back a week from Friday. So you might just kind of slack off, and as you get closer and closer to that Friday of the return, you're going to kind of try to catch up and focus on the work, but only because you are aware of that arriving date. If you don't know when the boss is coming back, then every day is about doing your job. And that I find actually helpful. We don't have to get caught up in literalism of the return of the master and all that, but every day is how we live out our faith. And we can do that with great hope for what God can make of our lives. So that's where I think this text is taking me right now. It is, again, a continuation of the last week's reading, where we can't ignore the place of wealth and possessions and greed in our lives, and we can't dismiss the call to address the needs of those who have little. It's all tied up in this whole chapter. And so we have to kind of just be willing to kind of face that. Both the fear we have about giving things up, and the hopefulness that empowers us to offer what we can offer. And again, in the theme, in a similar theme as I said last week in my sermon, that giving up, that offering of ourselves and our possessions, is not a loss. So we don't fear it. It isn't a loss because it is an incredible gift to get to participate in God's generosity for all people. And participating in that is experiencing the kingdom of God. So it's not a loss at all, so therefore it's nothing to fear. All right, those are my few thoughts on this text. We'll see where it goes. So we'll have worship in person and live stream Sunday at 10. And then I am on a break right now for adult forums. I would love to hear if you have any particular topics or ideas for what you'd like to participate in, and I'm going to start that up again in September. And I'm also, contemplating what kind of schedule works. Evening Zoom meetings have been very popular, but I'm also interested in doing some things after worship on Sunday mornings. So if you're interested in any of that, please let me know. You can email me or call me. Other than that, I hope you got to see I meant to mention this, the painting that I used at the beginning of the live stream. It's called No Fear. Go back and look at it. I think it's a great visualization of what Jesus is talking about. Okay, thank you for joining me. Hope to see you soon. Peace.